shadows beneath the spotlight. It was 1941, and the world was on the brink of chaos. All nations braced for the horrors of war in a quiet American town far from the front lines. Detective Evelyn Monroe waged a different kind of battle, one against darkness that lived closer than she dared to imagine. Evelyn was among the first women in the town's police department, a distinction that came with no small amount of scrutiny. But she was unshakable, determined to prove her worth in a world reluctant to grant it. She worked late nights, her desk often lit by a single flickering lamp, her hands ink-stained from reports and sketches of crime scenes. The faint crackle of the radio often filled the room, broadcasting news from Europe, the fall of France, the Blitz over London, the ominous march of Axis forces. Even as Evelyn focused on her work, the war's shadow loomed over every conversation, every headline. In those nights of solitude, she met Thomas Grayson, theater actor whose charm and wit brightened her weary evenings. He frequented the coffee shop near the precinct, often rehearsing lines over cups of black coffee. He was striking, with piercing green eyes and a smile that could disarm the most hardened soul. For Evelyn, Thomas became her sanctuary, a reminder of a world filled with art and passion. Far removed from her grim investigations, the first body appeared in early spring. A young woman, her body discovered in the woods on the outskirts of town. They pressed up the murderer, the Thorn Killer, owing to the peculiar placement of rose thorns embedded in the victim's hands. Evelyn, despite her junior position, was assigned to the case due to her meticulous attention to detail. The victim's belongings were scattered around her in a ritualistic pattern, something that gnawed at Evelyn as she pieced through the clues. Weeks passed and the murders continued. 3 victims in total, all women in their 20s, all killed with the same precision. Each crime scene left Evelyn feeling as though the killer wanted to be found, taunting her with deliberate details. Press grew more frenzied, and so did the townsfolk, who locked their doors and whispered rumors of strangers lurking in shadows. The war crept into the edges of the investigation. Rationing posters plastered the streets. Air raid drills punctuated daily life, and the police department was stretched thin as younger officers enlisted. Evelyn's workload increased as she tried to juggle the murders with other wartime responsibilities. Yet she refused to let the Thorn Killer slip through her fingers. It wasn't until the 4th victim that Evelyn's steady world began to tremble. The scene, a crumpled theater flyer, was found near the body. It advertised a production of Macbeth, starring none other than Thomas Grayson. The coincidence unnerved her, but Evelyn pushed it aside. For all, a theater flyer could belong to anyone. That night, Evelyn mentioned the case to Thomas. He listened intently, his head cocked in the way he did when something intrigued him. When she shared the detail about the flyer, his expression flickered just for a moment. But then he laughed, dismissing it as a bizarre coincidence. He teased her for her overactive imagination, and Evelyn, embarrassed by her own suspicion, let the matter drop. As summer rolled in, Evelyn and Thomas grew closer. Yet the Thorn Killer's spree persisted, leaving the town in a perpetual state of fear. Evelyn's superior, Captain Harrington, warned her not to let the case consume her. But it was too late. She began to notice small things, stray lines from Thomas' plays that seemed to echo phrases left at the crime scenes, his sudden absences during certain nights, and a peculiar fascination with her work on the case. One evening, Evelyn followed Thomas after he claimed to be meeting a friend at the theater. She stayed in the shadows, watching as he disappeared into the backstage entrance. Moments later, she heard raised voices and the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. She crept closer, her heart pounding, but by the time she entered, the room was empty, save for a shattered mirror and a faint scent of rose water lingering in the air. The unsettling scene stayed with her, raising more questions than answers. The war provided an eerie backdrop to her growing suspicions. Soldiers in uniform filled the streets, and blackout curtains covered every window at night. Evelyn's work often included helping organize neighborhood watches for potential saboteurs, a reminder that danger lurked both at home and abroad. She began to wonder if the Thorn Killer's meticulous nature was inspired by wartime propaganda, where every act seemed to carry a coded message. Then came the 5th victim, a librarian named Mary Hill, her body found in the town square at dawn. This crime felt more personal. The killer's message scrawled in lipstick on a shop window. Even the purest light cast a shadow. Among Mary's belongings, Evelyn found a playbill with Thomas' name circled in red. This couldn't be ignored. The weight of suspicion grew unbearable. Haunted by the evidence, Evelyn sought solace in her work. She threw herself into re-examining old case files, combing through witness statements, and retracing the steps of the victims. Her nights became restless, plagued by dreams where Thomas' charming smile turned sinister. During one of these sleepless nights, she received an anonymous letter slid under her door. It contained a single line: "The stage is set for the final act." Evelyn's resolve hardened. She confided in Captain Harrington, omitting her personal connection to Thomas but sharing her suspicions about the theater. Together, they devised a plan to surveil the area during the hours Thomas typically rehearsed. Days turned into a tense waiting game as Evelyn's fears grew. At work, Evelyn's partner, Officer Richards, began to notice her distraction. He confronted her one evening, urging her to step back and let others handle the case. "You're too close to this, Evelyn," he said, his voice edged with concern. "We all see it. Let me take the lead." Evelyn bristled but agreed to let him assist. Deep down, she knew she couldn't handle this alone. The final clue came when Officer Richards discovered an unusual purchase. Made under Thomas' name, a set of stage props including a replica knife, identical to one found at an earlier crime scene. With this, Evelyn knew it was time to act. She arranged to meet Thomas at the theater, where he claimed to be rehearsing for an upcoming production. Under the guise of bringing him dinner, she entered the darkened stage. Thomas greeted her warmly, his face illuminated by the flickering stage lights. But there was something different about him now, a predatory glint in his eyes, as though he knew the walls were closing in. Evelyn played her role, feigning ignorance, until she noticed a knife glinting on the prop table. Thomas reached for it, his movements deliberate. "You've always been so clever, Evelyn," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But even you can't stop the final act." A struggle ensued, the stage becoming a battleground. Evelyn's training kicked in, and with a swift move, she disarmed him and knocked him unconscious. Backup arrived moments later, summoned by a signal Evelyn had arranged in advance. As Thomas was hauled away in handcuffs, he turned to her with a chilling smile. "I'll always be a part of you, Evelyn." Pound rejoiced when the Thorn Killer was unmasked, but Evelyn's heart remained heavy. She loved a monster, and the betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Yet she stood resolute, determined to continue her work, ensuring that no other shadows would fall unnoticed in her town. Months later, Evelyn visited the now abandoned theater. The silence was deafening, the stage a haunting reminder of the man she thought she knew. She placed a single rose on the stage floor, a silent farewell to the life she had left behind. Outside, the distant rumble of trains carrying troops to unknown fates reminded her of the world's larger battles. As she walked away, her badge gleaming under the rising sun, Evelyn vowed to protect her town from whatever darkness lay ahead.